Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, Thomas Frank to Spurs. What do we think? Kieran McKenna to take his place. How would that help out Brentford? Then we've got Real Madrid. They could sell Rodrygo to Arsenal, but would that be the right move for the Gunners? Well, they could also bring in Álvaro Carreras at left back in a move that would embarrass Manchester United. Then we've got a keeper for Chelsea and a right winger for Newcastle. That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. So we're back for another Monday edition of the Transfer Flow podcast, and I'm rejoined by Ted Knutson. Ted's been missing for the last couple of weeks. How are you doing?
I'm vacationed. I'm holidayed.
Yeah, you're California'd?
I did, yeah. I was California'd. I got to meet really interesting people, including, I guess, the star du jour of Twitter yesterday, which was Ayla Girl, but lots of other people at this interesting nerd conference. And I also got to go to Big Sur, which is one of my favorite places in the world. And I ate excellent food all week. And I got to just take a big break, which is really important, especially after the football season. I wasn't on a yacht or anything like that, like all the other footballers. I was just chilling.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with those yachts is you're always on those yachts with other footballers, which seems like the worst part of it. I can't imagine why anyone would want that.
Yeah, this was like, I was in a conference with like the opposite of footballers, which is like autistic rationalists who are thinking hard about like how to change the world.
Sure. I think there's probably some crossover in some way, like if we really got into it. But
somebody
today,
got really offended when I said that like Lionel Messi is very clearly quite autistic. And they're like, oh, well, this or that. I'm like, no, seriously, like behind the scenes, when you talk to people who've worked alongside of him, like, and as we've known people from Barcelona over the years, like all of his habits scream like, yes, this person is definitely on the spectrum, which is one of the things that has allowed him to be incredibly, practice oriented and perfect every single little thing in his entire game.
It's actually probably quite a good jumping off point for our first topic, because I feel like the distance between autistic rationalists and your work at Brentford does seem like quite a small jump. Oh, fuck.
Keep digging. Keep digging, buddy. I'm going to let you go.
I've got nothing to lose. Okay, yeah, we are starting at Brentford today, though, because Thomas Frank, my boy, your boy, a little bit more your boy than my boy. He's your boy, my man. Looks like he's on his way to Tottenham from Brentford, and Brentford might be interested in Kieran McKenna as the replacement. Before we get to McKenna, should we talk a little bit about TF and what we think about him?
I feel it's finally your time to shine. You have the biggest excuse to step forward, since he is the primary target of the Tottenham Hotspur Football Club.
Yeah, intense dreamboat daddy Thomas Frank. I think we've been pretty up on him going to a bigger team for a while. He is an intelligent, flexible manager. He's been very patient about this. He doesn't seem to have agitated for a move out of Brentford at any point, even during a period where they've had quite a bit of turnover. And now actually is not the worst time for him to go, because looking through the squad, I thought this is more attractive, this squad, than I imagined it being. They have invested some money over the last few years, and they've got guys like Collins and Damsgaard and Van den Berg and Carvalho and Schade, who had a good season. They've still got Visser. Like, there's enough here that you think you can attract a pretty good quality coach. And the fact that they are coming off a very good season, despite the fact that every year it feels like people have predicted disaster for Brentford, really, it's hard to find a significant knock against Thomas Frank, except maybe if you're a hyper possession side, you wonder what he's going to be like. But I love the guy. He's, as I've said before, I think he's an excellent communicator. He can handle himself in press conferences, which has been a bit of a problem for Ange. And I think Ange had to go, and Thomas Frank is a very good candidate to bring in.
So I think in terms of timing, it makes a lot of sense for Frank. We got regular comments on the podcast over the last month, people saying, oh, I'm surprised the transfer slow is talking as if Ange has already been sacked. And we had pretty good indicators that it was likely. We talked about the rationales behind it. Dysfunction is a big part of it. Also, Spurs kind of rebuilding their but their administrative backroom.
Sure.
It just kind of makes sense. And they're not supposed to be in the Champions League this year, but they're gonna be. So like, it's a good time for a fresh slate, I think is how I might describe that. I didn't have a strong opinion either way.
Sure.
But Tea Leaf suggested that it was likely. Now, with regard to Frank, like as you say, it's a good time for him to sort of shift as well. Like he's probably taken Brentford as far as he obviously can. Those of you who don't know, I've tried to hire Thomas Frank for a couple of jobs, including when he was the assistant head coach at Brentford, when it looked like he wasn't necessarily going to get one of those, or he wasn't going to be put in place in charge of Brentford. And the funny thing is, like, we flagged him up, I think, initially on the list when we were looking for somebody who was not Dean Smith to actually coach Brentford. I did not like the Dean Smith signing. We were pretty internally loud about this at the time. I felt like we should have done much more research on signing a head coach that played a style that we liked. And one of the problems with Dean Smith over the years is that his style is not defensively sound. And that was true every single place that he went. Good pair of hands. People liked him in the dressing room. He managed up as well. So like that was nice. But when you're looking for kind of somebody that's close to tactically elite, like Dean was definitely not the case. So Thomas Frank was on a couple different lists way back when. This is a decade ago. And we were like, okay, so what does this guy actually do? And at Brøndby, he coached a fairly talented, like, top 3 talented team and did really well there until like sort of the bottom fell out. There were backroom politics there that caused some issues. And then the question at Brentford was, can he coach a defense well enough to allow us to be stable and then potentially get over the top with the other edges that we had, which included set pieces? And is he open to taking on this type of advice? And generally, that has been the case. I quite like him. I've met him in person a couple times, above and beyond the Brentford connections. And I think that you had flagged him for the Manchester United job, which I wouldn't want to wish on anybody to some extent. No. Spurs feels a little more of the right spot for him. And, as I said, and you said, the timing's right because Brentford are talented enough and managed well enough, regardless of head coach, that someone smart could come in. I think they have, if they don't get McKenna, I think they have challenges there, but we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I think Spurs is kind of well set up for some success. Like, don't get me wrong, they might get slapped around quite a bit in the Champions League, but they're considerably less likely to have that happen under Frank than they are under Ange. And look, we're not trying to like piss on the guy's grave here. Like, we were reasonably positive about Ange, like for large tracts of the season, and he was in a really difficult situation.
Both of those guys dealt with a bunch of injuries this season. They just came at different times. So Brentford in the first part of the season, if you've followed the gambling stuff, I was like, they're really challenging to bet on right now because there's like 3 guys that are like pretty important and they seem to rotate on being out on a regular basis. And, Brentford's first half of the season was not great, especially their away form was terrible, but they seem to right the ship significantly in the second half of the season, largely aligning with, some health in a squad that's smaller than Spurs and maybe a little bit less talented when all healthy, but not too far off.
But it's nice, isn't it, that there have been players who've gone to Brentford and then have been written off by, the fans or by mainstream media or whoever it is. And then those guys a year later, Brentford are getting some value out of them. This happened with Schade, even though he was incredibly young when he went. It happened with Damsgaard. These were players who people were saying, are they really seeing the return on it? And a year later, they get bedded in, and it just feels like Frank will get value out of the squad. And having somebody who can get value out of the squad beyond the first 11,
right,
which was such a massive problem for Spurs this season, that feels like it's going to add value to the club overall. You're not getting a guy in who's hyper specific about the attributes that he needs in his players. He's not going to come in and be like, an Arteta style ideologue or whoever it might be. He's going to be more open to what he gets. And Spurs are always going to have to be a bit more nimble in the market and take advantage of some opportunities here and there.
So let's state the 3 things that we think Spurs fans should take away from having Thomas Frank as their potential head coach. Number 1, he develops talent. And this is something that was absolutely mandatory at Brentford. They bring in lots of young talent. They then expect it to mature over the next couple of years and then often sell it on. Sometimes they bring in slightly older talent like a Wissa, and you still have to get the most out of them. So Thomas Frank is very used to that, and he's done it at multiple different levels. 2, he's tactically flexible because he had to play a very different style, Brentford getting up out of the championship, than he did necessarily keeping Brentford in the Premier League. And he's one of the last coaches to keep those teams that came up in the Premier League and do quite a good job at it. But also there's like a B in number 2 here, which is that he understands some of the unique style of play elements that Brentford have pushed for over the last decade. And he's going to bring that to Spurs, which I think is pretty interesting. So set pieces is one of those. Transitions is another one. And then defensive stability on top of that, and potentially long throws. Ooh. Could be some elements that Spurs will bring on board that either they struggled with or they were very inconsistent with during Ange's period of time. The third one, as you've said it, is like he's actually pretty likable. He's able to laugh at himself, and he's able to moderate a dressing room, I think, in a pretty good way, despite the fact that he's not traditional English. He's not even like a native English speaker, but he's very comfortable in the language, and I think he's very comfortable in the idioms, and he's used to working with the players in England across a broad group of nationalities and also guys from sort of different styles of play, different backgrounds. So I think that Spurs fans should be pretty positive about this and maybe even a little bit excited, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I'm excited about it, and I don't care about Spurs at all. I agree. I think Spurs kind of need Spurs when they're profiling a manager, they should go for the most relaxed man they can find. They managed to get because with Australians you either get really relaxed or kind of aggro, and Ange ended up being kind of aggro. But it's like
Jose aggro. Conte, aggro.
Whereas Pochettino had it in him, but Pochettino, I think, had that, his like energía universal thing where I think he had his sort of like new age calm that allowed him to just transcend it and stick to his cult leading natural vibe.
I feel like PSG and ayahuasca went together with like Pochettino's stint. Maybe that was the time, and now he's just like fucked off, relaxed. It's like, I deserve a little bit of credit. I need some universal love, though, as you say. So, yeah.
Sure. So, okay. So Frank to Spurs, good stuff. Brentford, though, looking for a replacement. McKenna be interesting if he went there, because McKenna was quite reluctant to jump in when Chelsea were interested, when Manchester United were interested. And don't get me wrong, I would have also been reluctant to jump into those jobs. But on the other hand, they do have quite a lot of things that make them attractive. And Brentford are a much more sane institution. That's appealing. A lot less money, and in theory, less talent. Certainly less talent than Chelsea. I don't know. It would be an interesting one to bring. How do you think he'd fit into the stuff that you've talked about there as the things that have become, if you want to call it like the Brentford way? How much do you think McKenna makes sense for that kind of stuff?
He would have to listen. So he has to be able to take on board info and be comfortable with somebody sort of aggressively wanting to add things to his style. Now, they can bring experts alongside of it. Brentford usually have somebody that is versed in set pieces. They do quite well in that, and they know that that's a full-time role for a coach. So you have to be accepting that that is part of it. You also have to be accepting that somebody else is signing the players, and they'll listen to you as to what you need or you think you need in order to execute your style. But you're not the one that's going to pull the strings there. Like you might get like the final list of 3 to be able to do that, or you might not, because like this market is really tricky right now and very choppy. So they'll listen to you on what you need, and then they'll try and give you the best potential options for your style. If that's the case, then, and he's able to play a more defensively solid style than sort of Ipswich played this year. Ipswich also had a ton of injuries at the end of the season, but he's probably in good shape. I have some concerns. I thought Ipswich would be a little more lively than they were. I thought that squad was not the worst, but I think the wheels really fall off at the end of the season. I thought that, talent wise, they were definitely kind of bottom 3, but they gave themselves a fighter's chance anyway. I thought Southampton was sort of the most likely of those teams to stay up, but Russell Barton just completely killed that option. And then Leicester could have gone. None of those teams were good. So if you come back with none of those teams are good, but McKenna probably outcoached his talent level by a lot the previous 2 seasons, Now you're like, all right, we see there's a lot of promise. As long as he's saying and contractually obligated in some cases to take on board some of the stuff, like you have to be contractually obligated to set pieces. If Brentford loses set pieces, they're going to be one of those three teams. Like it's just, it's the gap between like execution and playing style tactically. You're interested. If they don't get him though, like then there's huge questions around like who are they gonna pull out of the bag that they're comfortable with, that is willing to learn this stuff, that is already good enough to keep sort of a mid-tier talent team like in the Premier League. They do have good budget. They've got some players that haven't even played, like Igor Thiago, that may be good, but now we're not really sure. But they also continue to have to develop players. It's always going to be part of the remit. It should actually be the remit everywhere, except for like just a couple of teams. Look at Chelsea. You have to be developing those young player talent. Like they keep bringing in 22-year-olds, or they keep moving guys from other parts of their multi-ownership group. So, I have some questions as the depth of the coaching market after McKenna. I thought Will Still was an interesting prospect. He's now locked in at Southampton. So yeah, I guess they kind of have to find him and be comfortable with it. And presumably Spurs are paying Frank's buyout clause as well. So
yeah, which is about 10 million, right? So that will help Brentford out a little bit. Look, it's one of those things where I just think I have literally no idea who Brentford will hire if they don't get McKenna. It will be somebody I have not heard of.
Well, they've got a long lineage there. Frank has been around a very long time. And that also makes it harder to move on to the next coach, because things get comfortable around them and you operate in a particular style. So anytime that you hear us talk about football teams, and if you ever hear me talk about like the most challenging thing if you're an owner of a football team, and I actually give advice to owners, and I've done this for a decade now, the most challenging thing as an owner of a football team or multiple teams is replacing your head coach. It's not finding the players. It is replacing your head coach. And if you're a mid-tier or below team in almost any single league, you know that you have to do that every 18 to 24 months. Like that's just the average. Your good ones will get swiped from you, and your bad ones will be so bad that they submarine you and make you relegation fodder. So very, very dangerous for you. The average coaches are fine, but if you're kind of a unique team and you've got ideas about how to actually play the game as opposed to just who to sign, like that's a really, really difficult remit. And some of these multi-club groups actually have full-time roles now that only scout coaches. They profile and they scout and they analyze coaches, which I think is the right way to go about it. But you've got to realize that what I've been advising for the last decade is true. Your head coach hire is the hardest one, because there's the least people that are qualified. Language also matters. Teaching matters. It's a very, very difficult job.
Sure. But Brentford should have been preparing for this, right, over the last few years. Like they've known that Frank is on his way for some time. So.
Absolutely. I agree with that. They probably would have done a lot of legwork on who they thought were good coach candidates. Same thing that Bloom's group would. Like they would probably get advice from the people that have worked on the gambling side across all these different teams, and basically say, who do we think are the most interesting coaches tactically, but also are able to coach young players? And then they make a list and then they start to profile that. And again, that's at least a half-time job for one person, and possibly a full-time, depending on how much help they got.
Okay, well, I'm excited to see whether this one pans out. If it doesn't, I mean, maybe they had a guy who was kind of number one on their list, and then they think McKenna is just an opportunity that's come up for them or something. But
I don't think McKenna's wrong. I think there were very good reasons for him to be high on people's list last year. And so like giving him a chance, especially if he's interested, you think he's going to get along with the organization structure? Like, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, we've been positive enough about Spurs and, semi-positive about Brentford. Let's move on to Arsenal, shall we? Arsenal looking for a left winger. Rumours abound now that their top target in this position is Rodrygo from Real Madrid. He's been rumoured to be on the market basically all season. We've been preparing for him to come onto the market. 24 years old. He's an interesting player. He's shifted around a lot at Real Madrid over the last couple of years, and it makes sense for them to move him on. There was a brief period a couple of weeks ago where suddenly they were saying Xabi Alonso has spoken to the player and he wants to stay in Madrid and Xabi wants him to stay. And you're just like, you don't need this guy. Like, this is an eminently sellable player. As good as he is, as much as I like him, Real Madrid have got to sell him. And there's probably a pretty good market for him this summer, you'd imagine.
Definitely a good market. Definitely teams that have budgets in need. Like we're seeing possibly, a near world record fee potentially on for Wirtz, which I'm not sure I agree with, but Liverpool usually don't make big mistakes. So so they must be absolutely certain about that one. Rodrygo fits with Arsenal's remit, like where they love to have a flexible forward. They love to have a forward that can play a couple of different positions. I almost wish that they would have a new name for like my brain is like pull someone out of a bag and like let's add them to the stack there. But I think they're getting more of those from the academy than they are necessarily from the world transfer markets. He definitely, like, they have a need. He's really good. He is flexible in style. He is used to working with incredibly talented players and not necessarily putting his ego front and center, which I think is another thing that Arsenal have done over the years. Like, if you look at Odegaard, he was part of that starship group there where they knew he was too young, but he at least got training time. He got to learn from that. Havertz is another one where, like, sort of washed out at Chelsea, but Chelsea's been a weird situation for a long time. Bring him over, redevelop, revitalize his career. So it kind of fits with what they have done a number of times over the last few years, and definitely gives them a probable improvement over there versus Martinelli. So people will argue about Martinelli's sort of his impact on the pitch, and I think he's good. I don't think that he's a bad player. Like, that one, people seem to be too negative about it. But I'm not saying that they couldn't also use a good upgrade or one that's just going to be full-time available, and then they could bring him on as another flexible forward to cover either side.
Yeah, I defend Martinelli all the time because everything I see about him seems to be that he's useless. And I think when you look at his numbers and you look at the numbers of people who Arsenal fans would regard as a straight-up upgrade, you start to think, no, this guy is pretty decent. And also he's young enough that if he were to make a leap on from where he was in 22-23, when he had 20 goal involvements in the league, then suddenly you've got an excellent player. Actually, his numbers in the Champions League this season, I think he was at 0.6 expected goals and assists per 90. And in those games where maybe he has a little bit more space, he gets to run in behind a little bit more, he looks more dangerous. Plus, we saw him get some striker minutes too late in the season, which I think a lot of us have always been curious about. Rodrygo, I think the sensible move for Arsenal is to spend more of their money at left wing than striker, just because I like the left wing options better than strikers.
Sure.
Like, we're talking about Gyökeres and we're talking about Šeško, and there's lots to commend both those guys, but I have question marks about both of them. Whereas on the left wing, they're talking about guys like Nico Williams and Rodrygo, and to some extent, people like Rafael Leao are on the market. And again, there are downsides to them, but they're known downsides. I know what the problem is with Leao, for example. I know what Leao can do.
Leao's not coming to Arsenal. There are no circumstances where I try to put that player in that squad. That's not happening.
I also think he'd be a disaster for Bayern, like, maybe.
No, I want him at Bayern just because I want them to have more problems. I feel like Bayern actually, they need to have a drag coefficient. Like, they just need to have handicaps in the Bundesliga at the very least. And so anytime that they make chunky mistakes like Palhinha last year, where we were like, this is an insane fee, and now they're trying to get rid of him because he's not playing. Like, let them sign Leao and try and make that work. I love that idea. Let's do that, just because I want other teams in Germany to have a bit of a chance once in a while. That feels like the right way.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you're right. Mikel Arteta would kill Leao with his bare hands, but it just feels like this is Rodrygo. When you look at his numbers, I think you need to know the context there, because there are a couple of years ago he had an absolutely stonking season, which I think he was playing more in the diamond, and his numbers that year he was at like 0.7 expected goals and assists per 90. He was absolutely nuts.
As a baby,
4 shots a game. Yeah, and then it went down, and it went down again. And this season, it's not tremendous. It's like 0.3, 0.4 in Champions League. But you look at his numbers, and I think I can completely explain this. Like, touches go up everywhere except in the box where they go down. Shot quality halves. Getting dispossessed less, defending more. You're like, this is just a guy who's playing deeper
his
and
job
carrying
was
water for better players.
His job was to facilitate. His job was to facilitate for the players that took the primary roles. There's only space for like usually 2 of those. Real Madrid have had their best runs when they had 2 stars and a guy who like had no ego and did not care. Right?
Yeah.
And that ego did not care guy carries all of the weight for most of the success, because you have to like really submerge it for the all-stars to like have the best of the ball and the best opportunities. And sometimes you'll get better opportunities because they take so much gravity. So the question now is, what could happen if Rodrygo had more of the ball? And he had a guy on the other side who's also very elite at progressing and creating
Sure.
gravity and problems. Like, that's what Arsenal have missed for many, many years. They have one guy on the right-hand side that dominates most of the attention. They've got center forwards that are always kind of okay. Like, nothing. They haven't had a great center forward in God knows how long.
Sure.
And then you have somebody on the left-hand side that's like variable. And many times it's a younger player that has some pace, but like cannot be a problem, quote unquote, for most of the great teams. If you put Rodrygo over there and you have Saka on the other side, you suddenly have created a host of problems, especially since you now have potentially a middle eight in either Lewis Skelly or Odegaard. I think that's probably their middle eight combination that's most scary in attack. And also Lewis Skelly, like, first of all, Lewis Skelly is like an elite zone mover that people would be surprised by unless you watch the tape, right? They're like, oh, he's a left back. I'm like, he's a left back that runs and moves the ball. Like, he should not be a left back. Do we have another left back that's like that now plays up on the right wing? Yes, you do. You have Saka. He's absurdly talented in ways that you should not see at that age. And hopefully he doesn't get that kicked out of him. But I think that's kind of Arsenal's most reasonable and most interesting. Now, you put those parts together and you suddenly have a formidable attacking team that will shock most people versus what they have had this past year. If you don't, then they could be good if they're healthy and somebody advances a little bit more. That's the way that I see this. So this is why you and I think both, much more excited about the idea of a Rodrygo or a left wing sort of like upgrade than purely looking at the center forward market and being like, well, we got to spend 60 million on some dude. Let's go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. As we've said before, a bad Arsenal performance is not what the pundits say it is. It's not a game where all these chances were going into the box and they just didn't have the centre forward there to finish them off. It's a game where Saka has 2 or 3 defenders on him and the left winger is just running into traffic again and again and again. Like, that is the problem that Arsenal have been coming up against. Plus, I think, to put it simply, Havertz is better for his position than Martinelli is for his position right now when you consider what's available on the market. Like, Havertz does loads of stuff really, really well that Arteta really cares about, and he's willing to live with the demerits of Havertz, whereas Martinelli does a lot of stuff well, but you do just need somebody, like you're saying over there, who has the creative ability, who come inside and combine, who maybe is a bit more explosive in certain situations. Martinelli's explosive when he's got space, but otherwise he has trouble. So, and Rodrygo as well, great ball striker, can play on the right too. This one just seems like it makes a lot of sense, but the question is the price, right?
The price is always the question. So that there's 2 things going on here that I think are really interesting. One is that if you have a stable behind the scenes group that knows that they're probably going to be there for a while and has the mandate to plan for multiple windows, you don't have to make a move in this window. You don't have to get the exact player that is out there and you overpay, or you don't have to bottom feed on what's available to you. You can wait another window or 2 as guys come out of contracts. You make sure that, like, some of the players are aware that you might have interest, in the next window, should they come available, should there be more leverage on the space. So that's a really, really important thing for running a football team well. And Arsenal actually have that. They have a group that has been together for a bit. They brought in somebody to execute the deals, but Arteta knows that he's comfortable. And I think that everybody there kind of understands the process now, which is unlike a lot of these super teams where you see names come and go on the regular basis. So the second part to understand is that price dominates everything on whether a deal is good or not. There are resources that teams have, right? Resources include money, and they include time spent. Time spent here and time available for minutes in a squad is a surprisingly big deal for young players, But then the price thing could be anything. So you can't sign just a dude into Arsenal because they'll never play. And we've just saw them get rid of another one like Nuno Tavares. Sometimes they sign young players, they loan them out, they see if they mature, right? If you don't have the minutes, which is what Chelsea don't have. Chelsea have way too many players and way too few minutes in order to blood these players. They've even got Strasbourg where guys are playing fine, but nobody really understands what the French league is these days, etc. Money matters to a limited extent, unless you don't have much money, and then it matters a lot. So,
Sure.
So if you brought in an average player and he's 20 million pounds, you're like, yeah, that's totally fine. Like we can spend a lot of 20s and this is not a big deal. If you bring in a slightly above average player, say 65th, 70th percentile player, but you're spending 65 million, which is basically star player wages and star player transfer fees, that's when you shoot yourself in the foot. And if you do that 2 or 3 times, that is a lot of tickets that you've just burnt in the hope that this player is awesome. That is what teams like Manchester United keep fucking up over and over again. And that's what teams like Brentford and Arsenal and Liverpool are really, really careful about.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I think sometimes when we talk about guys like Cunha or Tiani Reinders, I think people think that we're saying these guys suck. And look, if you come to the eventual Transfer Flow / Man Down meetup, which we will reschedule at some point, then I will say to you, yeah, that player sucks. He's garbage. I hate him. But in reality, a Premier League quality player never sucks. Like to get a Premier League quality player, that player is always amazing. However, you don't want to pay the money that Man City are paying for Tiani Reinders for a guy like Tiani Reinders. You don't want to pay the Cunha money for a guy like Mateus Cunha. You can pay less for guys of comparable quality. And
if Cunha were the same price as Liam Delap, we'd be on board with that deal. If Cunha were the same price as Liam Delap, we'd be like, yeah, that's an excellent deal. I love that for Manchester United. They got like a nice buyout discount. Like he's going to improve their team. And if he washes out, like you can get rid of him and it's not the end of the world. The problem is a whole squad full of guys that you can't sell on because they're overpaid and they're not good enough to put you up into the Champions League, which multiples of these teams have had over the years.
And this is exactly how I feel about the Mbeumo thing. You know, I was like, Mbeumo to Man United, like you've got Ahmad, so I'm not that excited about it, but fine. I like Mbeumo. Great. What's the price? The first bid was 45 plus 10. And I thought, no. This is more than I want to go to for my final bid. I don't want to be starting at like 55. And they're saying they want 60 guaranteed from Mbeumo. Like, I like Mbeumo, but this to me is too much money. So I don't know. Or at least it's too much money when I have a left-footed right winger that I really like. You going to make the Mbeumo case?
A little skeptical.
55?
No, I'm just skeptical that price is correct. So okay. I feel like that's a price that's being floated into the media by interested parties. And I feel like they can't possibly be doing that. But my counterpoint to myself is they already paid the Cunha price. So who the fuck knows?
And I think it was Ornstein who'd said 45 plus 10, you know, and he's not a known bullshitter. But yeah, look, nobody knows anything like that. That is always the answer. But for Rodrygo, I think he's the best player available in this position this summer, as far as I could tell, unless there's some guy out there we don't know about. Or, of course, unless there's somebody who's maybe not quite as good, but very, very, very much cheaper, I suppose. I don't know. Real Madrid kind of want 100. They're not going to get 100.
What's your cap?
I don't know if they get...
This is the question, right? So like, what's your floor and what's your cap on that? Like we used to do the market making on this and we were really good at it.
I would get extreme. I would start getting antsy at like 75.
Yeah. That's my number. Like 75 is there. Okay. I'm on that. I feel 65 is like probably pretty good value. Like 100's not going to happen, especially if Liverpool could ruin the transfer market, but they're only ruining it for themselves because like nobody else is stumping that type of money. You don't see anybody involved at that level. Even City have done sort of fairly reasonable deals recently. I thought they overpaid for Marmoush, and then because they overpaid for Marmoush, they moved everybody else's market by a lot.
Sure.
But yeah, I still see in almost every instance that like you have to have a pretty hard cap on the amount of money you're spending right now because we're just not seeing the TV deals go up anymore. And we're not seeing like outside money come into football. So many of these teams are sort of quietly for sale and they can't get sold because like no one wants to take on the liability of running a football team, which is what it is. Like when you see that this football team has run negative budgets for the entirety of their recent history. You're like, oh, that is just a liability. That's not a cash generating asset. Like, how do we generate return out of that thing? Well, unless you're passionate about owning and running a football team, you don't. And so you don't have any more money that says, oh, the TV deals are just going to keep going up. And this is a place that has really good sort of tailwinds behind it. No one sees that now. So unless you're hopping in, like, there's nobody throwing a bunch of cash. Even the Saudis are being a little bit careful about the volume of players. Like, they might pay for over specific ones, but not a bunch of them. So yeah, I don't see there being a big transfer market uptake. So you have to be careful about cash now, because cash in the future could be worth more money, and overpaying for players is bad. We don't see Arsenal overpay for almost anybody. They might pay like at the limit. That's kind of how I see. And I think you and I are in range for like what we think the top is on Rodrygo.
Yeah, sure. But we were going to go to Real Madrid next, but I think we might save it, given that you talked about careful Saudis. And I think we might have to go to Newcastle first, because apparently they want to they're looking for a right winger, right? They apparently wanted Mbermo, but now looks like maybe United the front runners. Price already silly, in my opinion. They've now been linked to Joao Pedro, which is agent, in my opinion. And Anthony Elanga, who, if you just looked at the top line numbers, you would say, wow. And I did say, wow. I was like, 17 goals and assists in the league. That is crazy, especially because I don't think he's that good. Like, I don't know. That's maybe a negative way to put it. I like the player fine. He got those 17 goals and assists off about 10 expected goals. He's at like under 0.4 per 90. When you're going to buy a player out of a team like Forest, you really need to trust your scouts, I think. You know, like the passing numbers, those are always going to get depressed there. But his expected goals assisted over the last 2 seasons is actually pretty great. It's like 0.23 per 90. But I kind of thought, what do I think of Elanga? Like, very fast, great ball carrier, works hard, but actually weirdly little defensive work. Career dribble success is horrible. So I just really like they're going to get quoted 50 mil here. I don't do that with 2 years on his deal. Come on.
We should reframe this as where Newcastle are right now, because I think it's a very interesting political soap opera. Okay. From a popcorn gossip behind the scenes thing. So what happened last summer? Remind everybody what happened last summer.
So they brought in Paul Mitchell as director of football, and he immediately was like, yeah, we need to modernize this operation. Like, they've basically been flying by the seat of their pants, and we need to kind of get all this in order. And Eddie Howe apparently did not like that. Several people at the club apparently did not like that. And then there was a power tussle that went on.
Was it someone who was related to Eddie Howe?
What is it? It's like his nephew, or is it his like son-in-law or some weird shit? Like, I don't know. Yeah, some Eddie Howe's like nepotism network was not working to Paul Mitchell's advantage, and supposedly then Paul Mitchell was not allowed to go into the dressing room or something. Like, it got crazy. It got kind of crazy. Anyway, standoff. Howe ends up making the Champions League. Paul Mitchell leaves. He loses the war.
Yeah, so he basically lost the war. Exactly. What happens when these things occur, especially if someone is a little bit afraid of like replacing their head coach, is there are political scuffles, and these happen all the time. And some guys are pretty good to work with, and you can form like a good rapport. And then other ones like are always hands off. Don't touch my territory. I run this, I run that. And you will see them occasionally, place people in recruitment or director of footballs or whatever that are a safe pair of hands to them that they can kind of work with, but then they run on their process and not sort of a club process. Like, Dan Ashworth had kind of control over that. He was a big enough name to be able to want to put in structures. And then Ashworth obviously got poached, and there was this very long gardening leave. And then he went to Manchester United, where there was a very short period of time where he actually worked, which I find funny, but some people might find disastrous. And I like Dan Ashworth. I think he's a pretty safe pair of hands, even if he's not like an innovator. Like, he's capable of running large organizations. So anyway, Paul Mitchell comes in, and he's like, all right, I'm going to do the same sort of thing that Ashworth did. And then he and Howe immediately butt heads. And I don't think that he was wrong, because look at the PSR problems that Newcastle had last summer, right? We saw Newcastle selling assets that they would never want to sell assets, because they got themselves in a hole about overpaying for certain players that may or may not have been good enough, right? And so like you can argue about whether those players were good enough. You can argue about the fees that they paid, which I think is more crucially that. But what you can't argue is that they had to sell off a prime asset and then an almost prime asset that would never want to get rid of in order to make this spot. Now, the other way of arguing it is, if they'd gotten the points deduction, they would have made the Champions League. So I guess they made the right set of choices. You can, again, whether we're doing hindsight or forward sight are two different questions. Newcastle did just well enough, and they had a quality starting 11 to allow them to get there. And the Lewis Hall deal was also a good one, where they ended up getting a great left back as long as he's healthy for the rest of his career, unlike Luke Shaw. That is the circumstance that we find ourselves in this summer. Now, Eddie Howe has had history for this. People probably won't know, but behind the scenes at Bournemouth, like he was very, he was a good head coach for Bournemouth, but also like very territorial. And Bournemouth at one point brought in advisors and people that were pretty sharp, saying, hey, this is the list of players that we would look at for these positions. And Howe rejected some future Champions League players for Bournemouth that they could have gotten at the time, because he didn't like that. He didn't like anybody encroaching on his structure. He now has power, and he's looking at Anthony Elanga, who we think is maybe just a bit better than Premier League average for Newcastle, who were about Premier League average in their outputs, even if their position in the table was not. That then suggests that he should be about a Premier League average price if you're going to pay for it, or you have to see that he's going to make a significant leap in the next year or two to be able to come in, because you're not going to, he's 23 right now. His birthday is
He just turned 23.
His birthday's in April. So he's 23 basically for the whole of the next season. Good, but not like elite is sort of what you see. But he has some level of skill that you might be a little bit excited about.
Yeah, and there is another level there to go to, potentially. Like playing in a team that attacks a little bit more, turning 23, it's totally possible. Given the output that they've had from Murphy this season, which I find hard to, I don't want to take away credit, but he's not a player that I think is like endowed with magical gifts. Like he's just a good player with like an interesting collection of skills. It feels like you can upgrade there kind of easily. But if you're looking at 50 mil, then yeah, I just think you can get better than this elsewhere. Go and get better value elsewhere. Or you're maybe saving up more hurt for 2 or 3 years down the road. We're going to be in exactly the same situation where you lose another Minter or another Anderson.
Yeah, like taking gambles in the 8 to 20 range is quite reasonable, because you can take 2 or 3 of them. And knowing that even if you're certain that this is your guy, like plenty of times your certainty doesn't pay off. We've seen this over and over again in the recruitment space. Recruitment space will make you humble about your opinions, because like sometimes guys just won't work out for reasons that you either did or did not understand ahead of time. That's usually the way to do it. Now, there are facts in Elanga's favor, which is one, that he is quite good at creating for other players. And maybe Newcastle have a system that means that they can have interchangeable parts. If they had just a little bit better than Murphy, maybe that's going to be helpful to them. Sure. There are times you want somebody with elite pace that can stretch things, and having more of those players is good. Maybe they're a little bit worried about, Gordon's sort of long-term availability, given that this year seemed like a bit bumpy and how often he was in the squad. So I think that there are needs that they have. I just worry about eggs in baskets, much like last summer. The Mark Gahey thing was like a disaster, right? That was not a good pursuit, and that was not a sensible amount of money for anybody that works in recruitment. And I can tell you this because I did a poll. It's like, what would you top out at for this particular player? And they're like, yeah, that makes no sense given the other players that are available. So we have seen in the past that sometimes they will get very, very narrow-sighted and choose 1 or 2 players and potentially overpay for them. Often, if they already know them from the Premier League, that's when they get excited about it. As I said, I don't think he's a bad player. I think he probably is a bit above average. He might even be a nice addition at the right price. I get scared when the numbers around Mbeumo or around Elanga are kind of where they are. But maybe the market just says, hey, we're going to be punchy about anybody that's a Premier League player that can play an attack.
I do not want to get into a negotiation with Nottingham Forest, though. That does not sound like a good time.
They have a lot of players. They can sell a lot of them. You never know if it's a real price or if it's a PSR price.
They just sell these guys to Lyon, though. Lyon just come in and take 3 guys off them a season for 75 million. I don't understand it.
I don't think they'll do that this year.
They already are trying to do it, aren't they? They're trying to get Danilo, or they like for 25 million. Like that's the rumor. There's always somebody. Look. Okay, there's only so much we can cover crime here. Let's look at Real Madrid.
Is it like cross borders artwork? Like the price is more about what somebody owes somebody else and whether it can be smuggled away from taxes.
Yes, exactly. Okay, Real Madrid. Like, let's before we get sued out of existence. Álvaro Carreras, Real Madrid, looking for a left wing back. Apparently, they need somebody on the left. They haven't been excited about Fran Garcia because they've got eyes. They haven't been excited about Mendy since they signed him because he never really exploded the way that it looked like he might when he was in France. He was quite exciting when he was in France. They now apparently want Álvaro Fernandez Carreras. He is an interesting player. He came through at Manchester United. He's played in the Championship. He's played a little bit in La Liga, and he's spent the last year and a half at Benfica, where last season he got nearly 3,000 minutes in the league and 900 minutes in the Champions League. So you've got quite a lot of information on this guy now. He just turned 22. He's 6'1". He's very athletic. He's quite an interesting candidate. But before we get into him as a player, I want to ask you, does it not make anyone at United wonder what they're doing when they see a guy like this linked to Real Madrid? You know, it's the same with Garnacho. Like when Garnacho goes to a superior club, a superior team, let's say, to the Manchester United, is anyone going to ask, I wonder what these guys see in him that we don't?
I don't know.
I don't get it.
Ask these questions. It's like if if you're dating somebody and you're like, oh, you know, she didn't work out. She wasn't hot enough for me. And then like she only dates a string of like supermodels and actors and musicians that are all incredibly fit. And you're like, maybe I was wrong. And then like you look around and you're like, all right, who else can I date that's exactly like her, but not her? Which seems like the perpetual thing about Manchester United. They have lots of money. They were previously very attractive, and now they're trying to lure in, you know, people to solve their problems. Sorry, he seems really good.
Each of our podcasts slowly turns into the other podcast. You know, like this is kind of what's happening. Like over time, we'll just kind of meld them. Yeah, he does seem good. Like that is the simple answer, isn't it? It's like this guy seems good, and also he plays in a position. Like, you could understand Man United not being interested in him if they were like, well, you look, the setup that we play, he doesn't make sense. But he does make sense, and they've got Luke Shaw. Like, they went and bought Dorgu. I like Dorgu fine, but I mean, they supposedly had a 15 million euro buyback, something like that, on this guy, not executing it. And now it looks like the price for him is going to be his clause or close to, because it's Portugal, and his clause is apparently 48 million euros. Probably going to get closed after the Club World Cup. This is being treated in Spanish media as basically done. I like it a lot. I like the guy. I like that he's played in multiple leagues. He looks a really solid dribbler across all those leagues. He was pretty creative in the Champions League last season. Interestingly, more creative in the Champions League than he was domestically, where he was much more of a possession type player, which is interesting that he can do both of those things. Not like the world's greatest one-on-one defender right now, but pretty solid. Like, there's a lot to like here, and I don't think it's that hard to upgrade on Mendy and Garcia at this point.
Yeah, I think Mendy's probably a good player, but he no longer really fits in there, and I think they're happy to see shot of him. I like this player. I like this deal. The problem with left back market is like there's just not a lot of great left backs, and so anytime you find somebody that could be capable, you're going to pay top dollar for it. This is a little bit about managing your budget for the places that you know are going to be expensive, unless you get lucky to have somebody come out of your academy. I guess Madrid don't have anybody that they're excited out of their academy either to plays this position, or like they're like 2 years away, which happens sometimes. You're like we need somebody to fill in for 2 years that could be our future left back, and then we can sell these guys on. But otherwise, we're sort of stuck, and we need personnel now that can perform in the Champions League. So this guy has all the information you're looking for. As for Manchester United, people get so grumpy with us when we just talk about how bad they are, and then you like point to the table and you point to like things like this, and you point to the past deals over the last 5 years, and you're like, even last summer we thought they were doing okay, but it's the first time they've done okay in in a decade in terms of their recruitment. And then Lenny Yoro got injured and wasn't ready yet, and they had a different head coach that they brought. It's so messy, and yeah, I wouldn't. It's bad.
I hate the fans doing this, man. Like, it's so annoying. Like, do you think that the problem at Manchester United over the last 12 years has been that people have been too negative about the stuff they've been doing? Like, seriously? Come on. Like, if you want, you can tune into a Manchester United podcast and they'll tell you that Man United have the best young players in the league, and Man United are great at recruiting players, and that Ruben Amorim is an amazing tactician, and that everything about the club is wonderful. And then you'll wonder at the end of the season why they suck, why they're absolutely dreadful, why they lose half their football matches in the Premier League. And you'll be absolutely bamboozled. Or you could listen to people who tell you something you don't want to hear. Well, maybe somebody at United does need to be told something they don't want to hear, and then
we even do it for free.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Let's not. Okay. We've only got so much time. All right, let's wrap up today then with Chelsea. Mike Maignan apparently could be on his way out of Milan. Looks like Milan are kind of turning things over this summer, right? Reinder's out, Maignan probably out, Leao probably out. Maignan's 29, but he's a really good keeper, and Chelsea probably need to move 5 keepers for this to make sense. Mm-hmm. But he is a good keeper and a clear upgrade, right?
I would love to be on commission like at Chelsea sales right now. That'd be such a fun job. Like, do I just bring in like 5 to 20 million this summer for myself, and then like anything that I sell is bonus for them, because they got to get guys off the wage. That's the biggest problem. I really like Maignan. I've been a fan of his for a very long time now. I remember being quite interested when Milan signed him. He's been even better than expected for most of his seasons there. The only reason why they're not keeping him is because he's going to run down his contract. And so he's ready to get like one last big contract. Who knows how long goalkeepers stay good for? So that's an open question. I'm kind of spooked about Chelsea so far this summer, because I think we're mostly on board for not only the prices they're paying, but who they're targeting. Kim and I are like, "Ooh, this kind of makes sense." As opposed to last summer, we're like,
Delap, Maignan.
Yeah, these are.
I don't like it. It's weirdly normal.
Yeah, and it's not just normal; it's smart. Like the prices seem good. The needs are correct. There's no agent fuckery behind the scenes that we can see in obvious ways. I'm freaked out.
Maybe the prices are lies. Like that would make this make sense. Like I think the Gittins one, we've been hearing that they want to pay like 35, 40. And then I think Dortmund are briefing that they want 50 to 60. So I mean, we'll see where that one settles. But these good players.
This one they're briefing like 15 million euros, and Milan are like, it's going to be 25 to 30. I think it probably gets done at 25-ish, but we'll see.
I'm fine with that. Give him a few years. Like if you're going to stick with Maresca, you might as well give him a keeper who can actually kick the ball, and also who's very comfortable doing stuff outside his penalty area. Right, like that's something we've seen from Maignan very consistently, that he can clear up outside the box, and he's just not an idiot. Which, like, I'm not saying that Sanchez is an idiot, but I think Sanchez becomes an idiot when he's under pressure. And so does apparently everybody else in goal for Chelsea over the
Sanchez is just incredible amount of yips. Like that dude can't make a putt from 3 feet to save his life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that brings us to an end for today. We've covered a lot of clubs. We've actually covered a lot of players too. Probably angered 2 or 3 fan bases, but maybe some are happy with us. So
we hate your team. All of you. Also, next week we're doing Chelsea rebuild, so get on board. It's going to be fun.
No, we're going to have to do so much cocaine over the course of the following week. I think that was Kim's joke. She was like, how am I going to write this preview without access to amount of cocaine? But maybe they're getting a little less cokey, which is disappointing. Ted, we've got Man Down coming up this week. So if people aren't following us over there, what do they have to look forward to? What have we been talking about recently over on Man Down?
I feel like we got fashion coming up. So if you're looking to improve your sense of style, that's definitely coming up on Man Down. The transfer flow has turned 1. Do you believe it?
Yeah.
We're 1. as of this weekend. And so I'm going to do a bit of a recap as to what we've learned over the last year, what bad decisions I've made, which things that we have done spectacularly well, including hiring you.
Thank you. I was waiting for you to say. I was like, Jesus Christ, when's it going to come?
Yeah.
Look, yeah, we've had fun this last year. I've got to say, I'm enjoying football more now than I have done in years, and it's genuinely really entertaining to be in a group chat with a bunch of people who hate everything.
Except me. I'm like the positive person. Yeah, it's really weird.
You are actually you're very positive, but Kim and Nico's kind of balance it out. Thank you very much to all of you guys who've been listening to us and watching us over the past year. We really appreciate it. It's been really fun to do this and to have such an engaged audience. We will be back on Wednesday with some more transfer news. We might talk a little bit Club World Cup as well. Mm-hmm. Send in any transfers, any questions that you've got for us, but we will catch you later on. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow, and on today's episode, we're talking Thomas Frank to Spurs and Kieran McKenna possibly to take his place. Oh, cunt.
Cunt. Fucker. Cunt. Cockwomble.
Oh, don't say that word. Please don't. I would go to The Hague if somebody says that word in front of me.
I'm bringing it out at the meetup now. Yeah.
I fucking hate it.
I'm just going to walk up to him multiple times, whisper in his ear.
It.
Cockwomble.
Oh, God, we don't even have an HR person that I can report you to. It's bullshit. I can't even have an email trail. I'll just email you. Okay. Hello, welcome back. Rishi, you're an independent witness. Oh my God.
Lady Garden.
Stop it.
Minge.
That's fine.
Clunge.
It's the kind of annoying euphemistic vibe of cockwomble, that I fucking hate.
You like the directness of meat flaps.
Yeah. I like that. If anything, it makes it much worse. That's how insults should work.
Sorry, I'll just let you get back to it. I think Real Ascot's coming up, so cockwomble fits perfectly.
Turbo cunt. Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow, and on today's episode we're talking Thomas Frank to Spurs and Kieran McKenna possibly to take his place at Brentford. Then Rodrygo, what would he fix for Arsenal, while Real Madrid are looking to bring in a left back which could embarrass Man United in a roundabout way. Finally, Chelsea looking to fix their hole at bitch! Fuck.
Chelsea looking to fix their hole. That's what I heard.
I knew a girl called Chelsea.
Woohoo! Stripper name.
Stop it. Okay.
Good job. That was tight. Got there eventually.